The morning of December 1st, 1948, broke over Somerton Beach with a quiet that belied the storm to come. The air was crisp, salted by the sea, and the first rays of sunlight glinted off the waves. John Hargreaves, a jeweler walking his dog, noticed the man first. He was slumped against the seawall, legs stretched out, head tilted back as if gazing at the stars he'd never see again. His suit was pristine, gray double-breasted, tie knotted tight, shoes polished to a mirror shine. A cigarette dangled from his fingers, unlit, as though he'd paused mid-thought. Hargreaves assumed he was drunk, a common sight after a Saturday night. "Oi, mate, you all right?" he called, nudging the man's shoe with his own. No response. The dog whined, tugging at its leash. Hargreaves leaned closer, saw the stillness in the man's chest, the faint blue tinge to his lips. He stumbled back, shouting for help. Soon, a small crowd gathered, locals, early risers, a fisherman hauling his net. Someone fetched the police. Constable Robert Moss arrived, his boots sinking into the sand. He knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse that wasn't there. "Dead," he muttered, pulling a notebook from his pocket. He searched the man's clothes. No wallet, no keys, no name. Just a pack of Kenseta's cigarettes. Oddly, one was a different brand, a comb, a used bus ticket, and a scrap of paper in a hidden fob pocket. Moss unfolded it, squinting at the printed words. Tamam Shud. Persian, he'd later learn. "It is finished." The ambulance came, and the body was carted away, leaving the beach to its whispers. Moss stared at the scrap, a chill creeping up his spine. This wasn't a vagrant or a suicide. This was something else, something that would haunt Adelaide for decades. Detective Inspector Lionel Hayes stood in the morgue, the air thick with formaldehyde and unease. The Somerton Man lay on the slab, his face calm, almost defiant, as if death were a minor inconvenience. Dr. John Cleland, the coroner, adjusted his glasses and began the autopsy, his scalpel glinting under the harsh lights. "Healthy specimen," he said, slicing into the chest. "Mid-40s, I'd guess. Athletic build, look at those calves. Dancer, maybe, or a runner." Hayes paced, hands clasped behind his back. "Cause of death?" he asked, voice clipped. Cleland frowned, probing deeper. "No trauma, no bullet wounds, no strangulation marks. But this..." He lifted the spleen, swollen to 3 times its size. "And the liver's congested. Poison, likely. Digitalis, perhaps, or something rarer. No traces in the stomach, though. Could have been injected, absorbed through the skin." Hayes scribbled notes, his mind racing. Poison suggested intent, murder or suicide. But the man's expression, so peaceful, gnawed at him. He examined the possessions again. The cigarettes, the comb, the unused train ticket to Henley Beach. "And that scrap, Tamam Shud. What's it mean?" he asked. Cleland shrugged. "Persian poetry, I think. End of something. We'll need the source." Hayes sent officers to every library, bookstore, and second-hand shop in Adelaide. Days later, Constable Moss burst into his office, breathless. "Found it, sir. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Some bloke turned it in. Said he found it in his car." The book was worn, its final page torn where the scrap had been. Hayes flipped it open, and there, on the inside cover, was a handwritten code. 5 lines of capital letters, MRGOABCDTF, Zaptifig, and so on. No pattern, no sense. He stared at it, the letters blurring into a taunt. "Get this to the cryptographers," he ordered, "and find out who had this book last." The code defied decryption. Experts at the university scratched their heads. Military intelligence drew blanks. Hayes sat at his desk late into the night, the lamp casting shadows over the page. Was it a message? A name? A warning? He traced the letters with his finger, whispering them aloud, as if they'd speak back. They didn't. But the scrap, Tamam Shud, echoed in his mind, a riddle wrapped in a corpse. Jessica Thompson lived in a modest cottage in Glenelg, a stone's throw from Somerton Beach. Hayes knocked on her door, the book tucked under his arm. She answered, a slight woman in her 30s, blonde hair pinned back, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Yes, she said, voice tight. Detective Inspector Hayes. This yours? He held up the rubaiyat. She paled, hands trembling as she took it. I found it, she stammered. In my car back in November. Thought someone lost it. Hayes stepped inside, noting the sparse furniture, the faint smell of antiseptic. She was a nurse he'd learned worked at the hospital, lived alone with her son, Robin. Mind if I ask a few questions? He said, pulling out the plaster cast of the dead man's face. He watched her closely as he set it on the table. Her breath caught, her fingers digging into her palms. Ever seen him? No, she said too fast. Never. But her eyes betrayed her, wide, wet, fixed on the cast. Hayes leaned forward. You sure? He was found near here. No name, no past. Just this book. And you. She stood, knocking over her teacup. I don't know anything. Please, leave. Hayes didn't budge. He's dead, Mrs. Thompson. If you know something, it can't hurt him now. She shook her head, lips pressed tight, and ushered him out. Back at the station, Hayes dug into her file. Jessica Ellen Thompson, née Harkness. Widowed, or so she claimed. Robin, her son, was 5, with ears that stuck out oddly, a trait the Somerton man shared. Coincidence? Hayes didn't believe in those. He sent Moss to tail her, and the constable reported back. She's jumpy, sir. Keeps looking over her shoulder. The next day, Hayes returned, but the cottage was empty. Curtains drawn, door unlocked, a half-packed suitcase on the floor. Neighbors said she'd left with Robin at midnight. No word on where. Hayes cursed under his breath. She was running. From him. From the truth. From a ghost she couldn't shake. Weeks passed, the case growing cold, but Hayes's obsession burned hotter. The cryptographers linked the code to Soviet wartime ciphers, random, unbreakable without a key. Whispers of espionage filled the station. A defector, a courier, a pawn in the Cold War's opening moves. Hayes scoured shipping records, passenger lists, anything to trace the man's path. A dock worker in Port Adelaide remembered him. Tall, broad-shouldered, a faint accent, arriving on a freighter from Rotterdam in October. Hayes followed the lead to a boarding house on Hindley Street, a grimy warren of rooms. The landlady, Mrs. O'Connor, squinted at the cast. He stayed here. Quiet type. Paid cash, no name. Left this when he cleared out. She handed over a suitcase, its leather scuffed but sturdy. Inside, clothes with labels cut out, a stenciling brush, a knife, and a torn map of Adelaide, Somerton Beach circled in red. The map led Hayes to a shack near the shore, its windows boarded, its door hanging ajar. He stepped inside, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Furniture lay overturned, a chair splintered, glass crunching underfoot. A struggle, he thought. He pried up a loose floorboard and found a hidden compartment. There, a leather notebook, pages crammed with more code, sketches of military bases, and a name scrawled in Cyrillic Volkov. Volkov. Hayes's pulse quickened. He knew that name, Volkov, a Soviet operative tied to stolen British secrets. Was this the Somerton Man? Or his killer? The notebook hinted at a meeting, a betrayal, a poison slipped into a cigarette. Hayes drove back to the station, the pieces clicking into place. But the puzzle was incomplete, and Jessica's absence loomed like a shadow. Hayes's contacts in intelligence confirmed Volkov's legend, a ghost who'd vanished after infiltrating an atomic program. The notebook's coordinates pointed to Somerton Beach, a rendezvous gone wrong. Hayes returned there, standing where the body had lain. He pictured it. Volkov waiting, another figure approaching, a handshake turning fatal. But the man's calm face suggested suicide, a final act of control. He tracked Jessica to Melbourne, working under an alias at a hospital. She froze when he cornered her. He was here, she whispered. Days ago. Alive. Hayes's world tilted. The Somerton Man wasn't Volkov. Volkov had staged it, planting a decoy to escape. The code was a ruse, But the notebook held the truth. A safe house in the outback. Hayes led a team into the desert, the sun scorching their backs. They found the bunker, weapons, papers, a radio. Volkov was gone. A cigarette, but still warm. A letter to Jessica confessed his love, his sacrifice. Hayes pocketed it, the case slipping through his fingers like sand.